Hello, happy Valentine's week, everyone. Our goal here with this Valentine's Day letter writing class is to kind of leave you with an understanding of how much value your handwriting actually has. The emotion is completely different between, keeping something that's handmade versus keeping something that's digital. I think we can all agree handwriting is personal. It's super meaningful, it's sincere, and it's all the things that we've been talking about through these Inspire writing classes over the last 5 years that we've been doing them. And we're going to be together talking about all the elements of what makes a quote unquote good letter based on what we can learn from history all the way to modern day. We're going to talk about the ideal writing instruments to use when writing a love letter, what stationery to use, and really what we mean by heart-written letters. When we talk about something being heart-written, it's not necessarily what you say, but it's the fact that you're taking the time to put pen to paper and express yourself that's often what's so meaningful. So when it comes to creating a really sentimental letter, I want you to think about how the actual writing instruments that you're using and the stationery that you use can really impact that experience. So for me, when I'm writing in my journal for daily writing, I tend to gravitate towards more of a roller ball and a ballpoint. But always, when I go to write something like a thank you note to my clients, especially when I'm writing those novel length letters to loved ones, I love to put my fancy writing and my calligraphy skills to use by using my flex nib. So we're going to start by drawing some hearts here. And with the flex nib, you're going to see that I get some line width variation. So when I apply light pressure, I get a thin line. And when I apply a bit heavier pressure, I get a thicker stroke. So if I was to draw one of these hearts, and you can trace along with me here, that's a thin line. And when I go up, it's still thin, down, thicker, up, a little bit down, and down. So you can see I'm getting some line width variation there, and the same if I was to integrate some of my modern calligraphy. I love to collect sort of reference materials and things when I'm researching something. So I have gone ahead and gotten some secondhand books from back in the early 1900s, the late 1900s, like this one. This one's called The Art of Letter Writing. And I just find it fascinating to see how letter writing has changed. So 500 BC is the first ever handwritten letter that was thought to be sent. First ever handwritten letter. And that was by the Persian queen Atossa in around 500 BC. So that, again, could have been before that. This could be disputed, but according to research, this was the first ever recorded handwritten letter. When we get into the 18th century, this is where between the 18th century to modern day is where kind of letter writing began its heyday and then is slowly tapered off and potentially is getting into a bit of a revival here that we'll get to in a moment. So in the 18th century, letter writing was actually hugely important. It was the only way to communicate long distance with people. So it was actually learned in schools. It was an essential skill and formal education. And then we get into sort of this later 19th century to 20th century. So I would extend that to 20th. And so with newspapers and telephones and telegrams, letter writing became less for circulating news and events of the day, and became a little bit less common and more infrequent. So I'm just going to point out a quote down here from Emily Post. She said back in 1922 that 50% of mail was advertisement of some kind, 40% was business, and scarcely 10% of all mail was personal letters. And she goes on to say, of course, love letters are probably as numerous as need be, though the long distance telephone must have lowered the average of those two. And so when I was looking for a sort of heirloom copy, I found this really fascinating because this particular rendition of Persuasion, which was published, I believe, in the early 1800s, was redone to include handwritten letters throughout this book. So I'll kind of flip through. You can see what I mean. I just found this super fascinating that there would be handwritten letter editions in an actual novel. I mentioned at the time there were actually different papers for men to use versus women and other members of the family. But in modern day, when we're thinking about writing your love letters, we still want to consider this like a special occasion and look to papers that have an especially special quality. And that way you don't have some mismatching going on. And so this paper and envelope came together. They have matching deckled edges. So you can see here, that's it. That's called a deckled edge, where it looks like it's a little bit frayed. And it's the same as the bottom of the letter that also has a deckled edge. So now let's get into letter writing occasions and all of the elements of what makes an absolutely fabulously sentimental love letter. So since we have been talking about love letters over history, I loved coming across these two terms that you'll see on the next page of your workbook. So under love letter, it says the billet doux letter and a mash note. So billet doux means sweet letter in French, which is why I put that on the envelope that I made for you all. It says my billet doux to you. And that just means my love letter or my sweet letter to you. So that's just a really cute way, a little historical nod if you want something a little bit different for this year. And a mash note just means a letter that expresses infatuation with or gushing appreciation of someone. So we may think on a daily basis 100 times, I love my wife or I love my husband, I love my partner for a million different reasons. And now is the opportunity to actually get specific and to make them aware of what you're thinking on a daily basis, if that makes sense. So this class is called Heartwritten Letters. And what we mean by that is, heartwritten letters are personal, sincere, and specific. So I wrote that down in your workbook. I'm just putting a star next to it here. Personal, sincere, and specific. Heartwritten messages are personal, sincere, and specific. And I hope you're leaving feeling inspired. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody. We'll see you soon.